Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the television show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Elliot Parker. It's great to have you with us. We are joined by author and writer Michael Connick today to talk a little bit about his newest book, Trapped in a Hall of Mirrors, How the Luckiest Man in the World Became a Spy. And Michael Connick joins us today, and he has based this novel on his real-life experiences working with the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and the technology industry. Michael was born and raised in San Francisco, served as a consultant to the SAVAK in Tehran, SAVAK, which we'll talk about, and worked and lived in Vienna, Austria. He now resides in Huntington, West Virginia, where he writes, competes in practical pistol shooting competitions, volunteers with local organizations, and is very, very happily married to a truly wonderful wife. And we're delighted to have Michael Connick here to talk to us about his excellent novel, Trapped in a Hall of Mirrors. So, Michael, welcome to Chapters. Good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Elliot.
Tell us a little bit about how writing started for you and how you got into writing. Have you been writing all your life, or is this just something that you started recently?
This is something that I started recently. What I have always been my entire life is a voracious reader, and I've always been interested in writing, but I had never really done any serious writing. Maybe 10 years ago, I read Stephen King's book on writing, and that kind of inspired me. And I've read other books about authors in the process of writing, but I was very busy in my career. So what I did is I basically made a sort of a bucket list promise to myself. When I retired, I was going to write a novel. I had no intentions of publishing a novel. I just wanted to write a novel. And so after I retired basically in 2014. I went on a vacation with my family to the Outer Banks. We had a big rented house, a bunch of kids and grandkids and so on. And so at that point I said, well, there's not going to be a better time to start writing the novel than right now. So I actually wrote the first 10,000 words of the novel in that 1 week. And that's when I discovered a bunch of things about writing in me, which is, one is I love to write. It's fun. And it wasn't any work at all. I didn't have to struggle with writer's block or the discipline of writing. In fact, I actually, as you can imagine, writing 10,000 words in a week, I wrote like a demon. I finished the rest of the novel within a few months after that, and then I went through a period of continuous rewriting. And then eventually I distributed the novel to people that I called beta test readers and got good feedback, and family members, and particularly my wife really encouraged me. She said, look, if you're going to write a novel, you should try and get it published. So, of course, getting a novel published can be an ordeal. So I tried the initial things that everybody does. I tried to contact literary agents. I got some favorable feedback from them, but it was always the same thing. Gee, we think you have a good idea for a book, or we like the sample material that you sent us, but this is not what we want right now today. And I contacted a couple of publishers and saw this. Basically went through the same thing. So I eventually went through the self-publishing route. But one of the things that I wanted to do was to not tie up any money in it, because again, this was kind of done as a lark. Mm-hmm. So I found a way to get the novel published basically without me having to spend any money at all. It's now been out since February 21st. And at first, I was appalled that I only sold a couple of hundred copies in the first couple of months, but the more I talked to local authors, that's actually not bad for a self-published work. Mm-hmm. So, I discovered that it's fun to be involved in the marketing side of being an author, of actually going out and trying to figure out ways to promote my book. And found that I really enjoyed that. So the whole thing has been just a really good experience. It's been a lot of fun. One of the reasons, by the way, I was able to write the novel so quickly is because I didn't have to do any research, because it's really on the title page, I think it says it's a novel based on true events, and it's really a novel based on a lot of events in my own life. So that's why it basically came out so fast, because the story had been mulling in my head for my whole life. I had to fictionalize it a little bit, otherwise it would have been an incredibly boring book if it was actually a true autobiography. But a lot of it is based on fact. A lot of the characters in the book are actually real people. Some of the characters have had their names changed, but are based on real people. And some of the characters in the novel have been basically created by me for interest. So, I actually volunteer at the Huntington Museum of Art. I've always enjoyed art. We have some primitive art, folk art at the museum, and I think of myself as a primitive folk writer because I'm untrained. I've never taken any writing courses. I remember in college I took creative writing and got a C minus, and basically got a C minus because I wasn't an English major. If I'd been an English major, I probably would have gotten a D. But I learned to write by reading, and I learned to write basically in my job, because I've always had jobs where I've had to do a lot of writing, of reports, and communicating ideas to people, and selling ideas. And over time I got better, and I got complimented for my writing skills, even though obviously it's very different than writing a novel. But that's basically how I learned to write. I kind of learned to write on the job.
Very good. How did you get interested in working in the intelligence community? Because you did a lot and worked, as we mentioned, with the Department of Defense. You worked. You were a consultant to SAVAK in Tehran. How did you get into the intelligence community? Is it something you always wanted to do, or did you start in a government agency and just work your way through? How did all that start for you?
I graduated from college when during the midst of the Vietnam War, and so I was about to lose my draft deferment, and so one of my professors approached me and said, would you like to take a job with the government where you would get a draft deferment? And I said, well, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. At the time, the Vietnam War, particularly in San Francisco, was extremely unpopular, so it was not considered a glorious or even patriotic event to participate in. So I was definitely interested at the idea of getting a job with a draft deferment. So that's how I got first involved with the intelligence community. Once you get in, there's basically a lot of there's a lot of, we shouldn't say motivation. It's very easy to stay in for a long time. So I actually spent probably 15 years of my working life working with various parts of the intelligence community, and then I decided that I got tired of that, basically for the politics involved in working for a government bureaucracy, which is really what the intelligence community is. For a while I took a job with the Naval Surface Warfare Center and worked with them because I had a clearance, so it was very easy to get a job, and worked on strategic systems with them. And then eventually I got to the point where I just said, look, I just don't want to do this anymore. This is a strange world when you're working in a highly classified environment. The thing that really bothered me once was when I noticed that there was a car parked in front of my house, and they were probably just doing a routine security check, and it scared the heck out of my wife. And she was on the phone to me saying, there's this car parked in front of the house, well, actually across the street, and there's these two guys in there, and I said, describe them to me, and she said, well, they look like they're wearing sports coats and ties, and I said, is the car a Ford Crown Victoria? And she said, well, I don't know, but it's some kind of Ford. Yeah, it looks like a four-door sedan. And I said, okay, that's either the Naval Investigative Agency or it could be the FBI, and they're just kind of checking, and they'll go away after a day or two. And I said, if you want to have a really good time, call the sheriff's department and see what happens. Because the Naval Surface Warfare Center is in a very rural part of Virginia. It's located in Dahlgren, Virginia. And the local sheriff had many run-ins with the FBI, so he would have loved to come out there and hassle them if they were FBI.
That's great. That's a great story. We follow a character in your book named Stephen Connor, who in 1968 takes a job with the NSA. Tell us a little bit about him as a character, and what are some of the things he experiences in your book?
Okay, well, Stephen Connor, very similar to me, when graduating from, about to graduate from college, decides that he's going to take a job, or at least go on a job interview with what turns out to be the NSA. And so he takes a job with the NSA because it's going to give him a draft deferment, and it's probably very interesting work. So he's a very naive character. Uh, he's certainly not Jason Bourne or James Bond by any stretch of the imagination. He's actually, like I said, quite naive. So the NSA trains him on how to use computers. So he basically becomes a computer nerd. He works for the NSA for a while in a technical role, and then because he's doing things that the CIA wants, they actually arrange for a transfer from the NSA to the CIA to continue to work in a technical role. Well, while in the CIA, he gets the idea, gee, wouldn't it be great to actually be a clandestine intelligence officer, to be a real spy? So he, through conniving, a little bit of conniving and so on, decides that he's going to do everything he can to make that possible. So he ends up going to Iran and working with the Savak, which was the Shah's secret police organization, but he's working in a technical role. But he starts poking his nose in areas that he really shouldn't. And in fact, if he is found out by the local CIA station in Tehran, he's going to get into a lot of trouble. But he just can't help himself. And so he ends up attracting the attention of the KGB, who noticed that there is this American poking around some of their very sensitive intelligence operations. After he actually has a very successful tour in Iran for a lot of reasons, which you'll find out if you read in the book. And then so he ends up being sent off to Austria, Vienna, Austria, almost basically as a reward and to kind of get him out of the hair of the deputy director of intelligence, which is actually now the organization that he's working for. And while in Austria, he starts basically a pretty good friendship with the CIA head of station, who starts referring to him as the luckiest man in the world. Ergo, the reason for the subtitle of the book. But in spite of the fact that he's being called the luckiest man in the world, he soon finds himself in a position where he's raised the enmity of the KGB against him. He's got this East German woman who's actually a Stasi agent, who's basically starting to have, wanting to do harm to him. And then finally, he ends up stirring up the wrath of a KGB mole who's working in the Austrian counterintelligence organization, which is called the Stasi, which is called the Gestapo, and so all of a sudden now, supposedly he's the luckiest man in the world, but there's these three forces that are starting to move against him with every intent to destroy him. So really the crux of the book at that point is he lucky enough or smart enough to avoid being taken out by these forces before he can realize his dream?
Yeah, he's a great character that really goes through a lot. And you talked about the KGB. I thought there was an interesting quote on page 137 where there's some description there. It says, heck, if the KGB wanted to kill you, they would have a long time ago and arranged some kind of fatal traffic accident, dropped a piano on your head while you were walking down the street. Mm-hmm. I think that to me was a great quote that gives a lot of insight into just the kind of dangerous world that Stephen is in. And mm-hmm. You mentioned him poking his head around a little bit while he was in Tehran, but these are very serious people that he's dealing with and a very serious set of circumstances he's involved in.
Right. Well, one of the kind of core reasons why I wanted to write this book is because I find most spy novels incredibly irritating because they're incredibly unrealistic. Mm-hmm. The Jason Bourne, the James Bond sort of supermen who get away with murder, who do anything they want, get involved in ridiculous situations, seem to be able to engage in hand-to-hand combat against 20 villains and take them all out without breaking a sweat. I tried to make this book kind of realistic in that I show a lot of things that happen in the intelligence community, a lot of big intelligence operations really happen by accident. And Stephen Connick gets involved by accident in a lot of crazy situations. And not only that, but he's completely unaware. He's so naive that he has no idea that he's really gotten the KGB so interested in him, and that the KGB is suddenly looking at him like he is, in fact, a clandestine intelligence officer when he's still just working on computers. And the other thing is I wanted to talk a little bit about the politics that are involved in, particularly, the guys in the field are basically all really great. They're typically, very patriotic Americans. They're really doing a tough job, and they're doing it well. But when you start going into the higher level management positions within the intelligence agency, you run into the same thing you run into any government bureaucracy, and that there's a lot of office politics involved. So I tried to kind of give that, get that idea across in the book. And also I wanted it to be kind of funny, I love humor. So it's a serious topic. And in fact, when that quote is actually from Martin, who was the CIA chief of station in Vienna, and he's actually kind of telling a joke, because obviously the KGB is not going to drop a piano on somebody's head. That's something out of a Roadrunner cartoon, but he is, basically, because Stephen at that particular time is very afraid. He really thinks his life is in danger, and he really is in danger. So Martin is really kind of almost trying to make light of it. But and also telling him, look, if the KGB wanted you dead, you'd be dead already.
Absolutely. Something else that an interesting occurrence in the book is when Stephen predicts the fall of the Shah.
Yes.
In 1979. And of course, we know now, those people that lived through that period, and as we look back, that what that wrought in terms of Iran and where they are today as a result of the fall of the Shah. Tell us a little bit about that, and how Stephen sort of comes to that prediction, to make that prediction that the Shah is going to fall.
Well, it's very interesting, because when the Shah fell from power, everybody in the intelligence community on both sides of the Iron Curtain was completely shocked, because the Shah had tons of money. He had all this oil money. He had the largest military in the region. He had very strong backing from the U.S. government. When I was actually working in Tehran with the Savak, there were 75,000 Americans living in the city of Tehran. That's not in the entire country of Iran. That's just in Tehran itself. So there was a tremendous American presence. He had been buying billions of dollars of American weapons. He had the best weapons, and he had the Savak, which was a very effective, secret police organization. They were going after anybody who seemed to be a threat to the Shah. So everybody in the intelligence community thought, there's no way he can fall. He's in an impregnable position. But of course, what no one knew was the Shah actually had cancer, and so he was becoming weaker and weaker. He had really, the Iranian people he had tried to move Iran from a medieval society into a 20th century society in a remarkably short time. So all the people in Iran, who by the way are some of the friendliest, nicest people I've ever met, were really suffering from terrible future shock. And Iranians are very religious at their nature, and the Shah had also managed to really alienate and make enemies of the Islamic clergy. So he had a lot of forces against him. So but nobody really saw this. So how Stephen figures out that the Shah is going to fall is because everybody at the Savak that he's working with, all the top level officials at the Savak, he's working at Savak headquarters, they're all coming up to him and they're asking him, where's the best place to live in the United States? Where are the best schools for kids to go to school in the United States? How much money does it cost to buy a home in the United States? What's the best bank in the United States? And so on and so on. So pretty soon Stephen gets the idea, wait a minute, why are all these people who are the very top level officials within the Shah's secret police asking me all about living in the United States? So this is how he basically figures out, wait a minute, the Shah is not in an impregnable position because his very own security service is looking to bail out.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. not only when you read that in the book, but to hear you talk about it and to look at other examples in history in the 20th century and prior where governments have fallen. There's been sort of, you don't want to say dissension in the ranks, but people at those upper levels start sensing something's going to happen and they start looking to save themselves or looking at something's going to happen. So it's interesting that kind of carries over into this story. At one point in the book, the NSA is called the Great Puzzle Palace. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose that word, and is that something you experienced during your time in the intelligence community?
Well, again, the era in which this book takes place is basically Stephen works for the NSA in the 60s and 70s. And at that time, really, the only thing the NSA did primarily was they made codes and they broke codes. And so that was an internal name within the organization. They called it the Puzzle Palace because it's where people used to try and figure out puzzles, which was codes, or to create codes that could not be, for the United States, that could not be broken. So that was the primary, that was basically 90+% of what the NSA did, is dealing with codes and also electronic surveillance, intercepting radio and telemetry messages and so on all around the world. So they were constantly, in effect, puzzling with information, trying to figure it out, trying to break codes.
Very good. You mentioned at the beginning of the program that the first draft of this, or as you started working on the first draft, you got 10,000 words done in about a week. How long did it take you to finish the first draft, and what was the revision process like for you as you worked on this manuscript?
It took me about 3 more months to finish the rest of the book, which is, I think, 68,000 words last time I counted it. What I did was, my revision process was obsessive rereading and changing. Well, I was trying to do 2 things. Number one is because I didn't have an editor, I had to do my own proofing. So I was attempting to proof the book. And in the process of doing that, I kept finding, sections, sentences, paragraphs, and so on that could be expressed better, And so I basically spent another 3 months just rereading the book and going through it line by line, and it seemed like every page I would find something where I would say, no, I don't like the way that's written. I really think it needs to be improved. So, and as I mentioned the other night, having gone through this book for months, reading it over and over and over and over again, I finally ended up giving it to thinking that I had found every single typo, every single problem with the book. I gave it to a lady who's actually an English teacher, and she pored over it for a few weeks and came out with 105.
Wow.
Things that she suggested be changed, most of which were grammar or punctuation, and a lot of which were sort of debatable. But she still found some typos too. Mm-hmm. So it just shows you that I think it's, at least for me personally, it's humanly impossible for me to proofread my own material.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've had a lot of writers on the program that have said the same thing, that if nothing else, it's good to have, and I know you mentioned this too, beta readers or someone to look at it with a fresh set of eyes so that they can catch those things and give you that feedback. So what are you working on next? What is Michael Connick working on next? A sequel to this? Something totally different? What are you working on?
Well, first of all, I'm spending all of my time marketing my book, which is the lot of the modern day author. It seems even if you have a publisher, you still have a tremendous amount of marketing responsibilities put upon you. But I'm trying to actually kind of wind that down. I'm trying to kind of back it off, because again, I need, I always need to remind myself I did this for fun. I'm not looking at this as an income that I have to live off of. I'm doing it for fun. So there's a law of diminishing returns where unless I want to become a professional book marketer, I'll never have an opportunity to write anything again. So I'm actually working on a sequel to this. Well, this book, of course, Steve and Connor are supposed to be on a 3-year tour of duty in Vienna, but it ends after the first year in Vienna. So he's got 2 more years of adventures. And so I've actually started the sequel. I even have a title for it. It's going to be called Funhouse Mirrors. And so it's going to talk about, it's going to be different than this first book because the sequel is going to be completely fictional. The secret to this book, one of the things that the beta readers always came back to me, and in fact still people who read the book now, is they say, how much of this is true and how much of this is completely made up? Well, all the way through Iran is basically true. In fact, the Russians, the names of the Russians in that section of the book, those are real people. Those actually were KGB people. When it got to Vienna is when I started to get, basically, started to add more fiction to it, to make it, I needed to make the story more interesting. Because my time in Vienna actually was fairly routine. It wouldn't have been a very interesting book at that point. The other thing that was interesting was, one of the things that I found interesting is when I wrote this book, I had no idea how it was going to end. I knew that the first part came out really fast was because basically it was very autobiographical. Slight simplifications and so on here and there. It's not totally autobiographical, but it's very much based on that. And I had no idea how it was going to end, and I had no idea what Stephen was going to do in Austria, except that he better do something interesting. And it just, one of the things that I got out of on writing, and I read it about 10 years ago, so I don't even know if it really says that. It's looking back 10 years ago. But one of the messages I got out of that book by Stephen King is let the piece write itself and let the characters kind of live out their lives as you write it. And that's what I did in this book. And surprisingly enough, I came up with, I thought was an interesting story, and I came out with what I thought was an interesting ending. But I didn't know the ending of the book until I actually sat down and wrote it. I had no idea how I was going to wrap this thing up.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It's very interesting that you mentioned that too. So, Michael, in our final moments here with you, if someone wants to get in contact with you to talk to you about this book or about your writing, or get a copy of your book, Trapped in a Hall of Mirrors, how can they get in contact with you, and where can they get a copy of your book?
Okay, well, they can get in contact with me through my website, which is michaelconnick.com. So if they see how my name is spelled, put those two words together and add .com at the end, you'll come to my website. And my website, actually, for people who have actually read the book, I've gotten a lot of compliments on the website, because I actually have a lot of pictures of what Iran was like in the 70s and what Vienna was like in the 80s. So I've got that information. As far as where to get the book, I would first of all strongly encourage anybody in the Huntington area to come to Empire Books to buy it, because the Empire Books people have been so wonderful and so supportive, and Natalie, the manager here, has been very, very helpful and has arranged author signings, not just for me but for a lot of local authors. So if you want to buy the book, come to Empire Books first. If for some reason you're homebound or you can't get here, then the book is available on Amazon.com. It's also available on the websites of Barnes & Noble and Books A Million as well. It's also available if you are trapped in Charleston, West Virginia, and think that it's too far to drive to Huntington. You can get it at Taylor Books. If you're in between in Putnam County, you can get it at Books and Brews. So it's available in local bookstores, but if nowhere else, it's always available at Amazon. And it's also available as a Kindle book as well as paperback.
Very good. Well, Michael Connick has been our guest here today on Chapters. We've been talking to him about his career in the intelligence community and also his outstanding debut novel, Trapped in a Hall of Mirrors, How the Luckiest Man in the World Became a Spy. Michael, congratulations on your novel, and it's a great book, and anybody that is interested in fiction with a lot of military, intelligence, world historical events that are a part of the story, they should pick up your book because it's outstanding. And congratulations. And as you keep writing, as you write the sequel, we'll have you back on to talk about it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And we also want to take a moment to say thanks to Natalie Sheets and the staff and management of Empire Books and News for providing our taping space today and other on-site support and assistance. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News to pick up a copy of Michael Connick's book, and you can also find many of the other authors, publishers, and editors featured here on the program. Their works are for sale right here at Empire Books and News. That's at Pullman Square in downtown Huntington, so stop by, talk to Natalie and her staff, let them get you taken care of with whatever it is that you're interested in reading, and they can take care of that for you right here at Empire Books and News, and we appreciate them sponsoring us each and every episode here on Chapters. And if you want to reach out to us here on the program, we've made it possible for you to do that through our email address, which is right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. please do take a moment to list your name and where you're writing from when you send that email in. We do read all your comments and feedback, so please keep those coming. We appreciate what we've received so far, and if you do want to reach out to us, that's the best way to do it, right there at the email address at the bottom of the screen. If you've missed a previous episode of Chapters, or you want to go back and check out another episode of Chapters, maybe for the second or third time, we've made that possible to you as well through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube. The address is right here at the bottom of the screen. Put that address into your search field or your search bar on your computer. Look for the Chapters tab, and from there you can find all the episodes from our 3+ years of author, publisher, and editor interviews through the Armstrong One Wire page and the Chapters tab on the Armstrong One Wire page via YouTube. So we encourage you to check that out as well. And if you're on Facebook, we have a Chapters Facebook page as well. All you need to do is go to facebook.com. In the search field, type in Chapters, and there you can see all kinds of original content that you don't see on the YouTube page or at the email address or anywhere else on the Facebook page. And you can also see some of our most recent author, publisher, and editor interviews posted there. You can engage in discussion with viewers who have commented on the interviews and have a nice discussion about what you've seen here on the program. So that's available to you as well. Facebook.com on the Chapters page there. So we encourage you to check that out as well if you're a Facebook user. And that will do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.